can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Jamie Reed of BriteBirch. You can check them out at BriteBirch.com. And Jamie, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Some of the, so this is part of the top agency series. Some of the fan favorites on that, I had a D. Clevitt on. A D. Clevitt is a done-for-you agency that helps you document SOPs. This is interesting. So people come, they want to smooth out their onboarding of clients, onboarding of staff. Process, she'll come in and do that. We geeked out on our favorite productivity tools, software. So that was a fun episode. Another one that was good was Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey helps pair agencies with private equity. So he helps sell agencies. And so we geeked out on the agency space, the valuation space, M&A. He's got the Second Bite podcast, so he'll walk through actual acquisition stories so people can learn from those as well. So that was a great episode too. So check out more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise25. At Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. So, Jamie, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for the hosts. They can create amazing content, amazing relationships. Most importantly, run their business. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways on how I can give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and the companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Jamie Reed. He's the founder of BriteBirch Collective. BriteBirch Collective is a global integrated agency, and it's made up of over 300 marketing experts of various disciplines, sectors, backgrounds. This is a very different type of agency, right? And, Jamie designed it to lean into the new trends around how people want to work, while obviously providing clients with curated teams that are the right size for their budget and their needs. So will be really interesting to hear his take and how he's structured everything. Jamie, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So just start us off, and I'm going to share the BriteBirch website as you're talking, but talk about BriteBirch Collective and what you do.
Yeah, so BriteBirch Collective is a new kind of agency that I started after having worked in big agencies around the world in various capacities in marketing and advertising and things like that. And it was through sort of that experience that I started to understand the inner workings and the challenges that big agencies face, a lot of times hidden from what clients get to see. And at the same time, was starting to see how people wanted to work was changing, and this idea of freelancers was becoming less of a dirty word. And so as we started to kind of come together, we realized what if we were able to organize ourselves differently around client work. And instead of being a PR agency, for example, and when you're in a advertising agency, that solution is always an ad. And having been someone who worked in an integration capacity in a lot of these agencies, I always understood that the mix was much bigger and that their solution should be multifaceted and that it shouldn't just be cookie cutter. But that's not always easy to do, especially in big agencies. So started BriteBirch after I had left the last agency, which was Edelman in Singapore, moved back to Canada. And in doing so, started to kind of build out this new model. And it started small. And it's, our network's been growing, as you mentioned, up to 300 and plus, more than 300 people now around the world. Everyone's got a minimum 10 years experience. So we're trying to do much more up value work for clients. It doesn't mean that we don't get our hands dirty as well. And that's really just the difference is that we're able to provide those senior level resources that you tend to kind of not get access to when you're working with larger agencies that you may need to be able to work in more complex capacities.
I'd love to hear what you learned from from the large agency. I think Edelman's like been around since the 1950s, I think, and it's got thousands and thousands of staff. And I know you were in Singapore, which is cool. Right now, you're in Canada. What did you learn? What were some lessons you learned working there? I'm sure there were some valuable things and insights.
Yeah, I mean, Edelman was an amazing experience. One thing I definitely learned is that, and it wasn't just Edelman. I worked at TBWA as well as Ketchum in the Middle East for many years as well. So I was within like Omnicom Group. I was within, Edelman by the time I was joining was already becoming the world's largest digital agency and not just PR. And so, what I really learned was that at the end of the day, what an agency is and what clients want out of an agency is really talent and culture. And different companies, different agencies would have different sort of combinations of that. Sometimes talent was focused on a specific domain, sometimes, but it was always about the people and the talent. And at the end of the day, how do they organize themselves and how do they believe in what they're doing together and sort of riding the same train together and moving down the valley, right? So the that wasn't difficult to recreate, right? And a lot of people think agencies have to do with big fancy offices in the downtown and having fancy Christmas parties and going out for drinks every night. And there is a lot of that, don't get me wrong, but that's not what clients want to pay for, right? And so that was definitely one thing that I learned was that when you strip it all away, agencies are in service of the shareholders. And, by the time I was leaving, sort of the agency world, we were hearing about in Asia, particularly, a lot of advertising agency executives, young executives were starting to commit suicide. They were starting to have, a lot of overwork. They were really, being pushed to the bone. And I just felt like the culture generally, and again, this isn't an Edelman thing. This is more just generally in marketing agencies was getting to be a bit toxic. And so, how can we recreate that? I mean, for the many years that I've been working in these different places, I've been part of sort of teams of to try to pilot new ways of designing the agency, thinking about what the agency of the future looks like. And it was funny because I'd never considered that it could just be stripping everything away and just making it about the people and the culture. So yeah, that was definitely one main aspect. And then there's a lot of other practical things too, like multinational global holding companies. They may say that they can bring all these different pieces together for a company and in these big pitches. And on paper they can, but there's a lot of P&L issues from markets don't like playing nice with each other. Different divisions within these companies don't like playing nice with each other. So there's a lot of politics and there's a lot of
It's not as cohesive as it may seem on the surface.
Exactly. Like they paint a great picture about it. And so that was another thing that kind of struck me, like when I was working in the Middle East and I wanted to, I had a client that wanted to do some activation in, say, Egypt. It's like pulling teeth trying to get the Egypt team to do anything because they weren't the main agency. And so, and that always used to bother me. And so again, BriteBirch was like, well, let's take away all the politics. Let's take away the P&L issues. And so now, if you want to work with someone in a market, we'll put someone directly from that market on the team. And so the idea is that we'll build the team around the perspectives that you need to solve your problem.
I want to get into, fostering culture and what you do at BriteBirch, but talk about a little bit, you were in different countries, right? Like Singapore, you were in Singapore, Dubai. What was it like just being in a different country culturally compared to Canada or maybe the US?
Surprisingly, it's not as different as we would like to think or even sometimes try to make it ourselves, right? Like when I first went to Dubai, there was obviously that culture shock. And I started, quite low in the marketing rung, and worked my way up. I was, my first apartment was actually like the maid's room of someone's villa, like really sort of not very glamorous. But the one thing I really, really did realize, and I don't think it's just agencies, but definitely agencies help create the opportunity, is that if you're willing to work and you've got a good head on your shoulders and you're open-minded and able to kind of just jump in and help out and put your hand up when someone asks for something, you can very quickly sort of be recognized for being someone who can get things done. And because of that, there's just an opportunity to grow your career in places like that. Emerging markets, I think, generally are like that. But
How did
no,
that come
Dubai was an
about?
amazing.
How did you make it
The
to, yeah, Dubai, like that position in the first place?
Yeah, so that's like on a personal level. So when I first, I mean, my story starts back, I guess, in the summer of 2003 when I graduated university. I wanted to go into news media. I wanted to be like I guess like a news TV producer, and I had a whole bunch of interviews lined up with some major Canadian broadcasters. But then that summer, the war in Iraq and the in Toronto, we had SARS. I don't know if anyone remembers SARS, but SARS was kind of like before COVID. We had SARS, which was the severe acute respiratory system, and it shut down, major cities like I think Hong Kong, Singapore, but Toronto was one of the major hotspots, and so that's where I was based in. The whole city shut down. I couldn't find a job. The only job I could find was as a SARS screener at a hospital. And so, wearing a mask and goggles and gowns, and at 5:30 in the morning, I'm taking the temperature of every nurse that's coming into the hospital. And so that's how I got started out of university into healthcare. And I had never wanted to be in healthcare. I had no real interest in healthcare. But at the end of the summer, when SARS had gone away, I knew I was going to have to find a job. I noticed there was a marketing department in the hospital. So I went upstairs, talked to, the director, managed to get a job there, and started my
Yeah, I saw
marketing
the
career.
Toronto Rehabilitation Institute. I'm like, I don't think
Yeah.
he was doing rehab. This is not in the science background, but the marketing piece.
Yeah, and it was cool because, first of all, Canada has a public health system, so I couldn't understand, like, why are we marketing? Like
That's a great
what
question.
and it turns out that Toronto Rehab, it's now called something else. It's part of the University Health Network, but it was always a teaching hospital of University of Toronto. So there's a huge research department. And when we talk about rehab, it's not like drug rehab. It's actually physical and mental and cognitive rehab. So if you have a stroke, if you have Alzheimer's, if you have osteoporosis, they had programs to help people reintegrate into society and to be able to be self-sufficient and overcome, how to learn how to use a spoon again. So there was some really cool exposure to major disease areas like heart health, brain health, and things like that. Plus, I was able to, it was the beginning of social media and the internet as part of a marketing thing. So they kind of gave me free reign to manage the intranet, and I started getting them onto social platforms. I started to run the as well. So I was working directly with the researchers to help build out, the event space and dealing with, B2B stuff all of a sudden. So it was really, to be honest, it was a great first job. And I used to, but I'd get bored because the hospitals are still, public and they're slow moving. And I was a young go-getter. And so everyone was like, "Oh, you should work for an agency." And I was like, "Okay, let me see about that." But I would quit my job every 2 years and travel. And the first time I did that was to Asia. The second time I did that was to the Middle East. And when I went to the
How long were
Middle
you
East, that's
traveling
where
for when you quit your job? How long were you going to travel for?
first one was like a year in
A year.
Asia.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the second one in the Middle East was maybe, I think, about 5 months, 4 months,
And
something
then
like
when
that.
you do that, do you end up working somewhere locally or what do you do? No, not at
Um,
all.
No, the Asia trip, I started on my birthday in Tokyo and I ended in Bangkok on my birthday a year later and flew back home. It was just sort of like a figure myself out kind of year. I needed to do it. And I think I did figure myself out pretty good when I was out there. And it helped expose me to Asia and to the world. So it was great. But yeah, the second time I did that same sort of thing in the Middle East and traveled all around. And then my buddies in Abu Dhabi and Dubai were kind of like, Dubai is booming. You should look here for work. And so that's where I got hired on by TBWA. And that kind of, because I had the healthcare background, they're like, well, we need a health expert. And that kind of lasted my whole career. It's also why I got headhunted and brought into Singapore, also was kind of because of the healthcare background. And so despite, not really wanting to be in healthcare or having a particular love and desire to be a healthcare marketing expert, it was fortuitous that SARS happened when it did. And I took the opportunities as I saw them. And I think that goes to like one of my main lessons in life is have goals, but don't restrict yourself to a pathway towards those goals, and be open to opportunities to say yes to things and try things. And if they don't work, the worst thing, when I moved to Dubai, my dad's like, the worst thing that can happen is in 6 months you move back, right? Like there's really nothing to lose. And I realized that, pretty much everything in life is like that. You can always try something new. So yeah.
It's a super interesting trajectory. And when you were going to travel, you weren't expecting, oh, I'm going to stay here and live, but it just happened that took, the path took you there from Dubai, and then that path took you to Singapore, and then eventually you moved back to Canada. When you were young, Jamie, were you always like, I want to travel the world, or that just came about later on in life?
I think I wanted to be a photojournalist when I grew up. I was into like National Geographic and stuff. So I did think I wanted to, it wasn't like a travel itch, so to speak. It was just sort of like, I knew that whatever I did, the world was so big. I moved around a lot as a kid, like within Canada and Ontario and stuff. So I wasn't afraid to be in a new place and try to meet new friends. And like, I'd already learned a lot of those skills. But yeah, more than anything, I think you start to realize that humans are humans. We're all motivated by the same things. We're all more alike than we are different. And sure, there are differences, but those differences are something to be celebrated. And so, I would never trade. Sometimes I think like, oh man, if only I would have invested in Bitcoin or bought a property in Toronto or something when I was young and used that travel money for that sort of thing. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think I would ever be I would never give back that opportunity because it was just great experience.
Yeah, it sounds pretty amazing. So you decide, okay, I'm going to start my own thing, right? So that initial, talk about maybe getting the first client.
Okay. So when I left Edelman, left on good terms and everything, my first client was actually Edelman. And it's probably important to clarify, like in Singapore, it's so easy there. The government runs so efficiently. Everything runs efficiently. And so you could start a business with $50 in an hour. And it's that easy. You can do it online. And so I started BriteBirch as like Jamie's consulting business. And so I was going to try freelancing and be a freelance consultant, mostly focused on brand. And I think I was on a beach in Thailand when I had an old client reach out to me. They're called Le Safra, like the world's largest yeast manufacturer. So pretty much every loaf of bread you eat has Le Safra's yeast in it. And they asked me if I could help them launch a baking solution to Japanese bakers in Japan while I was sitting on a beach in Thailand. And and I'm with my wife and kids too, and we're all moving back to Canada slowly. And so I said, of course, I always say, yes, is my default answer to a lot of crazy questions. And so I realized I had to find some people to help me do this. And so I reached out to some people I'd worked with in agencies previously, some people that I was just connected to in Japan. Ended up pulling together a team. I had a creative director, PR expert, couple designers, an event specialist because we were launching it at a trade show, and we built this great campaign. And it didn't surprise me that the client was happy with the work. Like it was one of the more successful launches they had done in Asia in a long time. What actually surprised me was the feedback I got from the other consultants. I mean, this is where the BriteBirch collective idea started to come into my mind. Was they kind of were giving me feedback like, hey, Jamie, this is the first time I've been freelancing for 10 years. And this is the first time that I felt like I was back in an agency. Or Jamie, this is the first time I got to work with people that were outside of my area of expertise, not in a way where it's like the creative director would create a creative, direction and then hand it over to the client and never see how it gets executed. Or the PR person would always be brought in at the very end to make something famous, but they didn't get to be part of the strategy from the beginning. And so I was doing what I had always done in agencies, was bringing all the right people around the table for the client and working collaboratively to deliver a solution that was bespoke to the need. But it was never bigger, the team was never bloated. It was never bigger than it needed to be. And it was never smaller than it needed to be. It was right sized. And the feedback I got from the consultants also made me realize that, freelancing's lonely. It's hard. It's, you're often pigeonholed into an area. And it can be really rewarding to work for yourself, but at the same time, you miss the connections and working with creative people and people with different backgrounds that you can kind of start to let your own wheels turn, and you start to, working with a technologist gives you exposure to, what he's doing. And so now you're a little smarter on AI and what's happening. And so I think that's kind of woke me up to this idea that, well, maybe BriteBirch doesn't have to be just Jamie's consulting business. What if BriteBirch was a collective? What if the agency of the future was, not a bricks and mortar type, shareholder led company, but instead was just, a group of like-minded people who kind of came together with a shared passion to, do great work, really. And so now together we can win awards that we wouldn't be able to do on our own. Now we can do campaigns that are much more complex, multi-market, multidisciplinary campaigns that you would never be able to do if you were just working on your own. So that's kind of, by the time I made my way back to Canada, BriteBirch then had about 50 consultants around the world. And that was where it was kind of born, was on that beach in Thailand.
I know you have a lot of talent that you're working with on a daily and weekly basis. I'm curious, what kind of software, what kind of tech stack do you use to communicate with them, with the client? What software do you like to use?
Yeah, I mean, great question. It's way lower tech than I think it could be. I mean, there's probably a lot of investment I could be making into some dedicated platforms. And I have looked at a lot of them, but it's probably good to mention that like BriteBirch is bootstrapped. Like it's not, I don't have any investment or anything like that. So we're trying to use what we can. And so, yeah, we organize ourselves mostly on Slack at the moment in terms of how we coordinate around clients. We host, webinars, and we're using Zoom and stuff like that for a lot of sort of more sharing of knowledge. But then we've got, LinkedIn groups, and we've got what else? I think mostly I'm on all the G Suite stuff. So like we have pretty much our repository of knowledge is all locked within Google Documents and folders and stuff like that. So everything is also, because it's really important to make sure that not everyone has access to everything too, especially when it comes to client work. So we're very good at kind of creating firewalls and allowing access only to certain aspects of business for the team members and things like that. So yeah, we're using sort of existing tech, but I feel like there's probably stuff out there that's like more purpose built for what we're trying to do. It's just being able to, make it. Right now, it's working the way it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know a lot of
any.
agencies that, that use Slack for communication, and it works really well. And I know we use it and just kind of have like a channel per client and communicate there.
Exactly.
Do you use any like project management software, like when you're doing projects or releasing or assigning tasks?
Yeah, we use Rike. I had looked at a whole bunch of other ones. We started with like ClickUp, and then we moved over to Rike. But to be honest, like the way that we sometimes organize ourselves around the clients, at first I thought that we would be putting a project manager, we call them a client architect, centrally. I wanted to in-house that person. I wanted to kind of make that person a BriteBirch actually employee. And we tried a few times, and it sort of hasn't really worked out a great. And what I realized is like when we try to use outsourcing that role, everyone comes with their own sort of favorite tool. And so I've started to realize like maybe I don't need to dictate one common platform. Maybe it's like, going to be dependent on what the client's using, what whoever the client architect ends up being. And, we might have a preference to use Rike, but we kind of we do it by opportunity. So it's not consistent, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. We use ClickUp. We went from Asana and then started using ClickUp. I've heard people using Rike as well. I mean, they all probably, depending on the use case or work. I've used Trello before. I've
Yeah.
had people like Monday. So there's a bunch out there, but whatever
I still use a lot of
works.
spreadsheets,
Yeah.
like I still find sometimes just like a Google spreadsheet that you can share with people is sometimes does the trick. So it doesn't need to be, sometimes there's too much technology. We also use, for a lot of our marketing and just new business and leads and stuff like that. We do use HubSpot, and try to integrate as much
From
with
like a
that as
CRM
possible. But again, it's sort of,
perspective and like a CRM. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, as more of a CRM. But again, like it's got way more than I need in that, right? For what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I mean
What
the
about
technology equation.
structure for a second? Yeah, although it's helpful, I mean, Slack, Zoom, G Suite, Wrike, HubSpot. Talk about the structure and what you've discovered. You said like initially, because you have these really bespoke projects and you're bringing in all this talent from different places. What did you find worked and didn't work? You mentioned the client architect. You have a client architect at the beginning. You want to bring him in house. Now it seems like it's better to have that person also as a contractor. What else worked or didn't work from like the structure when you get a project in, how you coordinate the structure?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the philosophy around building teams has been something that I've been trying to really, I don't know, observe myself while at the same time trying to learn from, the most successful hockey and baseball teams and trying to understand like what the psychology of teams and leadership and things like that. Because you're right, like there's so many different personalities. The hardest part of any business is the human aspect of it. People are messy animals, I like to say. And I think being able to pull people who are essentially the best at what they do or very top shelf talents, there are egos involved. There are people that have sort of a way of doing things and trying to force them to fit within a team dynamic, especially when they're kind of on their own and working for themselves quite a lot. Sometimes you kind of get these personality clashes. And I think that is one of the hardest parts. And we often get the question from clients, well, how, if you're working with freelancers and everyone's just an outsourced employee, essentially, how do you guarantee that people aren't just going to like, F off and just kind of disappear on you and stuff? And my answer to that is always like, maybe you don't understand how agencies work, but on the inside of an agency, I can tell you the turnover, the fact that you have people on your account, they're not there for very long. Like they'll just keep churning. There's all sorts of politics going on in the background that is really messy. Like what you see is really just this one account person, but behind the scenes, it's not always so like sunny, like sunshine and rainbows. So, same, with us, I think because everyone is first of all, senior, they've been doing this for a while. They kind of know their stuff. And the reason why I did that was not only so to do more up value work, but it was also so I don't have to hold hands with everybody too much. Right. And so the way that we organize ourselves is a client gives us a challenge, right? A problem to solve. We identify and build sort of the team around the need. And so that usually requires me to kind of look through, we have a database, identify the talents and the expertise. And sometimes it matters what markets. And if we're trying to target, a certain demographic, then maybe it makes sense to put someone from that demographic on the team. Surprise, like just what are the perspectives that we need to be successful? And once we organize that, then the scope gets sort of broken down into, okay, well, what part of this can you handle as the, say, digital lead, right? And it's like, well, I can do this and this and this, and this is how I would do it. And they build out a scope and a cost. And then I take the scope and cost from all of the different pieces, put them together and build it into a more cohesive plan and a strategy where, again, that client architect person then becomes the shepherd of the project. just making sure everyone's doing what they said they would do and making sure holding everyone accountable to their aspects of the project. The only difference really from the way those people would be working on their own is that there's an expectation that, on a regular basis, we come together and we just let each other know what's going on, right? And like, how are we all working towards this same goal for the client? It's not rocket science. I could make it more complex than that, but it's really that easy. And the less I need to babysit and the less I need to kind of, we don't work on hourly, I don't have any need to kind of do timesheets and stuff that's not the kind of agency I want to run. If you're the digital expert and you say you can do this and this is how much that you want to be paid to do it, and you think you can do it within this time frame, then I will let you do it the way you see fit. And you're the expert. But I need you to make sure that you're keeping us informed about what you're doing, that you're showing up to all the meetings, so like there's definitely a high bar in terms of the participation and engagement. And so we don't, I can guarantee you that personality plays a big role in making it into BriteBirch Collective. We're not an open sort of group. It's very much, selected. And so a big aspect of that is like, hey, can you work with other people? Are you a lone wolf consultant, or are you someone who wants to collaborate and learn and grow and be part of a team? And more often than not, people, they want to be part of something bigger than they can be by themselves.
No, it's very interesting from the client standpoint. Jamie, who is the client architect? The one, if the client needs a meeting with updates, are there usually multiple team members on those meetings, or is the client architect kind of just getting all the info and having those client meetings?
It depends. So like different clients want different things. And again, so we organize ourselves around the need and what the client wants. If the client wants to have one throat to choke and like not understand, they don't care how the sausage is made, or, however that saying goes, then fine. Then the client architect is the face of the work. They have a knowledge and understanding of both what the client wants to achieve, but also what the team is doing and what they need. And so that person needs to be a fairly like generalist, because they need to understand, you don't need to know everything to know about the marketing mix, but you need to know enough about digital and about PR and about, to know that things are moving forward in the right ways, and ask the right questions. And so it is a tough role to find, is especially, I think they're the last people that agencies are holding on to, are those kind of generalists who are able to interface with the client, but also understand how the work gets done. So they're not, I haven't found a whole lot of those kinds of people that I can build into consistent client architects. I tend to play that role a lot, which is part of the challenge of my business personally, is just that I'm a bit of a bottleneck, in terms of our being able to scale. And I don't think I'm particularly good at client engagement, and it's maybe not my strength. So that's definitely part of the reason why I wanted to in-house that role too, is just to kind of maintain the quality and consistency, because they are the ones that are interfacing with the client. So, but yeah, in terms of the rest of the team, it's, if the client wants to hear directly from the digital lead or from the technology guy or from, we'll definitely make sure that those people show up to the meetings when they need to.
It's super interesting. And you mentioned talent and culture. So I want to break those up for a second and talk about talent. What are some of the ways you've been able to attract talent and vet talent? Because like I was saying at the beginning, there's over 300 marketing experts in people that you pull from. So what are some ways that you've attracted talent and vetted that talent over the years?
Yeah, great question. I think the work does a big part of it, right? You show that first piece of work that we did with La Safra in Japan, on the back of that, I had a lot of, people talking and saying, hey, I heard you're pulling people together. Like, could I be part of this? And again, like I didn't want to just make it an open sort of collective. I wanted to make sure that it was selective in a way, but not so selective that like people who are part of BriteBirch can't go and be part of other collectives and do their own thing also, right? So it just means that you're available should should the client need require your expertise when I, come calling, that hopefully you're still interested to be part of something, right? So we have redundancy within the the talent framework. So for example, if I needed a creative director, I have a few in North America, I have a few in Asia, I have a few in Europe, I have a few in Latin America, and so on. With the idea that, if one person isn't available to do this piece of work, then I have some backups and stuff like that. But no, generally the way that people are usually recommended to me is one of the main ways now that I'm growing the collective. And mind you, I'm not trying to grow it too much beyond 300 until I have enough, until I'm able to feed everyone with business. It's kind of, there's no point in me being 10,000 BriteBirch members. So just trying to keep it tight in that respect. But yeah, no, everyone either I had worked with who have decided to have a career change, or maybe they were laid off, or maybe they came highly recommended. They've been freelancing for a long time and people are like, oh, you should know this person, right? Sometimes the client will have an opportunity that is a little bit outside of a comfort zone, or maybe we recognize there's a perspective that we need around the table that we don't have within BriteBirch. And then I go proactively reach out to people, meet them, have a conversation. I vet them, get their, look at their CVs and stuff, and then invite them to be part of the business opportunity. But to do that, then they have to be a BriteBirch member because there's a code of conduct they have to sign. And then we contract them as well. So it's it's all above board in terms of how we operate. We're like fully we're incorporated within Canada. We have insurance and all that stuff. So we're like a legitimate operation. I just don't have any employees and I don't have offices. And it's just, which was crazy to everybody until COVID hit. And then it was sort of like, that makes so much sense. Which is kind of, it's amazing how sometimes the world works like that.
On the talent side, we'll talk about fostering culture, but I know on the talent side, you're working on something at the time when this comes out. It may be on, kind of on the website, but talk about Bright Start.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning from a talent perspective, like if everyone's got a minimum 10 years experience and they've all been freelancing for multiple years, then, because of that, everyone skews a bit older, a bit more mature. And so when clients come asking for TikTok campaigns and things like that, I've had a lot of saying, hey, Jamie, can we have some new blood, maybe some younger talents, or some, especially as they too kind of want to scale their own operations, like having some younger talent would help to allow for that. It kind of opened my mind to what's also happening in the workforce. There's so many layoffs right now. There's so much more coming this year, I think. And a lot of people now who have been looking for jobs are finding that, despite the fact that you're seeing on LinkedIn so many job opportunities, no one's responding. No one's getting back to you. It's going into some black hole somewhere. And people need to pay their rent and they need to be able to be successful working for themselves. And so a lot of them are turning to freelancing, but the data shows that if you're not successful in the first year, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And as we were, talking before, freelancing isn't just about, hey, I have a skill, I'm going to go just apply it to someone. It's a small business. You're running an entrepreneur. You're being an entrepreneur. And so with that comes tax implications, legal implications. You need to register with your company, with, I guess, some, legal entity. You probably need a website and you have to build up your brand and you have to market yourself. And so there's these practicalities of being a freelancer that I think a lot of people take for granted when they first venture into working for themselves. And we have all this inherent expertise and talent within BriteBirch, right? These 300 experts who have been freelancing for a long time and they're quite successful and they build their career around it. So we want to now leverage and create a much more open community of freelancers and invite them to, gain all of the things that freelancers need to be successful, which is, guidance and mentorship, access to training and honing your skills and identifying your target market and helping you brand yourself and all of those things. At the same time, networking and creating events and stuff like that. So Bright Start is sort of like a a spin-off of BriteBirch, which is meant to build out the ecosystem, identify top talents and maybe give them some exposure to BriteBirch work as well, build their portfolios, get them a leg up. And so it's going to be this sort of really great community that's going to be much more open in terms of anyone can join. It'll be free. There'll be some sort of, pay for play in terms of access to mentorship and access to some training and stuff like that. But generally, we're going to try to keep it as open and free as possible to just really make sure that this next influx of freelancers are able to be successful at what they do, because we're definitely seeing in Canada, for example, productivity's down, entrepreneurship's down, the economy's down, jobs are down, but freelancing is up and it's going up. So how can we help that next generation of freelancers is kind of the impetus behind BriteStart. So anyone listening, I invite you to check it out. And we'll on the BriteBirch website, we'll have a link pretty soon anyway. But
yeah, we'll link up BriteBirch.com in the notes. So if you're looking at the post, it'll be in there. So check it out. And it's free. So that's awesome. I wanted to talk about culture for a second. You've been in a lot of organizations. What are some of the things that you've gleaned, whether it's from the big agencies that you do now, that helps foster good culture?
Yeah, well, I want to preface the answer to that by saying that I don't think I'm very good at the culture part of BriteBirch, to be honest. Maybe some other people might disagree, but it's the hardest part of running my agency model, is keeping everyone engaged and keeping everyone in the loop and keeping it's a full-time job just to kind of keep everyone abreast of what's going on, especially if I don't have enough work to keep 300 people, fed. Then there's a chance that, you might have a very specific niche in what you do, sitting somewhere very far away from where I am. You're not top of mind. A client job comes in. Right now, I've been focusing, being in North America, I've been focusing on new business, mostly on North America, but so how do I keep someone engaged who's sitting in Bulgaria or sitting in, and so we have members all around the world that, unfortunately probably feel a little bit disjointed from the collective. And a lot of that, it just has to do with my capacity in being able to keep everyone abreast of what's going on. And so I do need to do better. It's one of my resolutions for 2025 is to kind of be better communicator to the rest of our collective and keep everyone informed. I think BriteStart's going to be a big part of that too. Sounds like because it's going
is like will inherently do that in a sense.
And that's really the part of the reason too, is just to kind of, make it more inclusive for everybody to be involved in. And there's an opportunity for BriteBirch members and their expertise to offer services through, BriteStart to their, to this next generation of freelancers. So yeah, I think it will help spur some new engagement within our community. But no, and to answer your question about what I've seen in the past that makes agencies successful from a cultural standpoint, it's a few things. With TBWA, it was my first exposure to an agency that has a methodology, right? And so TBWA, if you don't know, is all about disruption. They're the ones that disrupted, the Sony Walkman to create the Apple iPhone or the Apple iPod at the time and stuff like that. And so disruption being this methodology where you kind of look at all the conventions in the industry and then you purposely try to break them and grow the pie instead of trying to take a slice of the pie. And so, because of disruption, everyone that is part of that agency goes through some training, has similar language to speak, has similar ways of showing up to the client that are consistent, right? So that whether it's me or my colleague, we're kind of showing up in the same way. When I moved to Edelman, they didn't have so much of that type of methodology. They did, but different groups within Edelman had that. But what Edelman had that I really loved was the fact that it's a family-run company. That really, they really push that as part of their culture and their ethos, particularly around having some having agency within the agency to be able to do be an entrepreneur. And so they really promoted entrepreneurship within Edelman and being creative. Richard Edelman would personally like approve projects for really interesting. Like when I first joined Edelman, I found out that there was someone who had put up her hand and said, "Hey, I want to create a video documentary series that's also a research project that we can use to show clients that we can create content and do research." And he's like, "Sure, here's a bunch of money, go do it." And she just traveled around Asia for a year doing that. I was like, "Wow, this company's awesome. I want to do something like that." So I think I think those are the kinds of things where it's a little bit hard to reproduce those. But I mean, the TBWA example within Bright created something called a perspective mapping exercise like thing. So when we talk about perspective and being diverse within BriteBirch, the whole point of that diversity is to provide more perspective to clients. But having perspective, identifying perspective, taking perspective, those are skills that you actually have to consciously think and put yourself in other people's shoes. And so I've created some IP and some tools that help clients do that. And so I am trying to make sure all of our BriteBirch members are smart on that so that when they talk to clients that we're all speaking the same language and doing that sort of thing. And then the agency, giving them the ability to work the way they want to work and do the work that they, how they want to do it. That already kind of exists within the model. So I am taking a little bit of what I'm learning from other agencies, but like I said, it's the hardest part of this business.
Jimmy, I have one last question. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I did want to hit on, I'm going to pull up your site here. So we're on BriteBirch.com on the work section. I just briefly, in a few minutes, talk about LG for a second in a few of the interesting points there.
Yeah, sure. So when we were working, I was introduced to LG through a Canadian AI company called Edelman AI that no longer exists. But they had done this big piece of research for LG. LG had recognized that AI was coming. They were wanting to put it into refrigerators and robot vacuums and things like that. And so Edelman AI had done this big piece of research, but they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to, it was just very technical and it was a very heavy document. So what we ended up doing was, first of all, we helped them develop it into a framework. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the automotive industry and the self-driving cars, they have a very clear way of talking about level 1, level 2, level 3, and what that, level 3 self-driving means, that the car can drive on its own hands-free, but you still need to have someone in the car. Level 5 is like when it's going to be completely on its own. So the industry had a way of talking about AI and its advancements that gave developers, consumers, everyone sort of an idea. But that didn't exist in consumer tech. And so you could buy an electric toothbrush that says, hey, it's got AI in it, right? At the same time, it doesn't really do anything, or it has no AI in it. Or on the flip side, people are starting to invite Google and Siri into their homes. They don't know that you're basically, your house is becoming a laboratory for these companies who are taking your data. And so the whole point of the work that we did was then to take all this research and say, hey, let's create a framework for consumer industry to help consumers understand what it means when you say level 1 AI, level 2, things like that. And so it's funny because we did this 5 years ago and we launched it at CES. And I think CES is on right now as we're recording this. But it was way ahead of its time, because now that we're seeing with ChatGPT and we're seeing how the issues that a lot of consumer products are having when it comes to claiming AI, but also some of them actually putting really robust systems into their devices, consumers just aren't smart on it. And so there's a lot more fraud. There's a lot more data breaching. There's a lot more, negative effects of all this. And it's only going to get worse. This framework is something that I've been starting to pull it out of the closet and be like, hey guys, we should all just kind of refocus on this because the industry needs it. And so that was a really cool project because it just exposed me to so much about AI. I interviewed some of the biggest names in AI, in robotics, in digital research and also employment, because we knew that there was going to be big issues coming down the line in terms of how people were going to use AI agents in their jobs and stuff like that. And so it's a really cool. The whole point of it was to create sort of what we called artificial intelligence experience, sort of like UX when you're building an experience for a web interface, but this is AIX. So it's about how do you build AI systems for consumers, thinking about them from the beginning of the instead of at the end, so that they can be part of the development of and be purpose built. So
Amazing.
yeah, it was a really cool project. We had people from all over the world working on that. The client was based in Korea. I was in Canada. We had people in Singapore and in Bulgaria and everything. So it was a cool project, that one.
Jamie, first of all, thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, your knowledge, your lessons. This has been really very interesting. Everyone check out BriteBirch.com and more episodes of the podcast. And we'll see everyone next time. Jamie, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.